Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of the Murder Part. Tonight we'll be looking at the case of Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter. And I'm sure I mispronounced that, but we'll mispronounce it many more times before the video is over. So before we get started with this episode, I want to introduce my co-hosts. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well?
Doing well and doing good.
Good. So we've had a few requests for a bit of an introduction, and we recorded a channel trailer, but it's not up at the time we're recording this. So today we'll kind of do an introduction before we get rolling into the Gerhartsreiter case. So, Jeff, let's start with you.
So my name's Jeff Pincin. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I specialize in OCD. I'm licensed in Delaware and Pennsylvania. And if I wasn't going to be a counselor, I would have been an aristocrat. Of course, that didn't work out. I didn't know any.
I'm so sorry that didn't work out for you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Aristocrat would have been great.
That would have been awesome.
I didn't know important people. It didn't work out.
I wish I had, I wish you had become an aristocrat. Then I would be able to say, I know an aristocrat.
If only.
More shattered dreams. Mike?
How's it going? My name's Mike Smith. I'm a licensed professional counselor of mental health, also licensed in Delaware. Like Jeff, I have a master's degree. We were both students of Dr. Grande during our grad school program. I worked for him as a graduate assistant. My specialty is in the area of narrative therapy and geek therapy. I like to build rapport with my clients through shared interests and things like video games, nerdy stuff, anime, all sorts of things. I play D&D, so I'm trying to, at some point, put together a therapeutic D&D game for clients. So that's where my interests lie.
And did you have any other career choices other than counselor?
Yeah, I wanted to be a TV producer for the longest time, but unfortunately, I didn't know how to get to Vancouver from here.
So you could have been a TV producer and you're a counselor instead.
Yeah, sorry, Mike.
That's a tough break.
It is.
I would have watched your movies or your TV shows.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Wow. So again, just a trail of broken dreams on the way to counseling.
Yeah.
We couldn't lie our way through these broken dreams.
Right. I think that's how most people end up as counselors. Just they have other dreams and other things, and then they end up just finding their way.
What is it they say about like Delaware here where we live? It's not a state you move to; it's a state you move from. Kind of.
I like to think of it as a state of being.
Very good, very good. So let's get started here, taking a look at Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter. He's got a very complex past. So I started working on a video for my other channel on this case about 1.5 years ago. And my outlines are usually about 4 to 6 pages. I had 2 pages done. And I figured today, in preparation for this video, I would finish up that video. It ended up being 7 pages. It was like untangling a ball of yarn.
Oh, yeah.
Like going through the multiple sources. One source says this, another source says that. Mm-hmm. It's because I think he used so many aliases. He had quite a few. And because there's very fragmented accounts. So like there's whole years that are missing. We don't know what he was doing. Yeah. Presumably he's still, well, we'll talk about what he does. He impersonated different people, but
it's kind of like the Gordian knot. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just so like, where's the end? You can't find it.
Or the beginning, or the middle. Right. Or anything. I mean, yeah, it's not well documented for sure.
No, it's amazing to me how effective he was at keeping his life secret by using aliases, how much that defeated law enforcement almost completely. Yeah. It was like he took all the tires off their cars or something. Like they couldn't go anywhere. And I think we just take it for granted that when you see a person, when somebody is like, this person was here, this person did something, that you're going to figure out who it is, right? You'll get a description, you'll see some surveillance video from somewhere and be like, oh, that's Bob, whatever. But this guy was invisible. He didn't exist.
Do you guys think, and maybe we'll answer this throughout the video, but do you think it might have been different during an internet age, since that was primarily before the internet? So we're looking at 70s, 80s, 90s, before the internet was real big, perhaps. Do you think it might have been different in an internet age, like if it happened today?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. If he grew up with social media, I think he would have been able to game it if the way he did everything else. Like it's not just about the lies, but he really went out of his way to build up those backgrounds. Like he chose specific things so that people, if they looked into it, would find stuff, and that would confirm his identity. Like,
I guess you can be whoever you want on the internet too.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been different just because of the connectivity, and this was a coast-to-coast criminal. And I think that going to Greenwich, Connecticut from California, I think the internet, I think people would have made those connections faster, searched him. He did do a lot of research to build his characters. I still think it would have been harder if people could have searched, like Lord Mountbatten. They could have figured out pretty easily he wasn't related to him, But maybe he would have, done a different alias, a different background if he had the internet to contend with. He's still alive. He is a clever criminal.
He's very clever. I think like if he'd had the internet, I think he probably would have very quickly learned how to leave breadcrumbs, like creating websites using Photoshop to put himself in so that people would know. And he could have spent hours. I think he did spend hours creating these aliases, and then put them into effect, and then people just bought it. Like he lived for years under some of these names, and people just accepted it.
And he was arrested in 2008. So he really, part of this was during the internet age. I think that was when he got arrested. I guess would have been right around maybe when social media was really getting big. We had MySpace and things like that before.
Just about the start of the smartphone age.
Yeah,
I think the iPhone came out that year. But yeah, things like MySpace, Facebook existed.
Yeah,
and
so I wonder if he could use that.
I don't think they were as big at that point.
Right,
but
right.
Yeah, it would be curious to see how he would have performed in this day and age, kind of competing with different technologies that could help him and hurt him. Reminds me of there's a case, it's also in a Netflix video, the Lucas Magnotta case. It's a famous case in Canada where it probably was a narcissism situation where Lucas posted multiple, created multiple characters and complimented himself on the internet. Built his own fan base. I wonder if maybe that would have been Gerhartsreiter, like, oh, he's the best.
If you're going to be a fan of yourself, you might as well go all the way.
That's incredible.
I think there's actually been a few cases like that where on social media, you can, to an extent, you can create multiple accounts, like on Instagram and Twitter, and you can say things to your main account like, oh, you're the best or the greatest, whatever. It seems like an odd use of time, but I guess if you really need friends.
Right. Why not be friends with yourself?
Does beg the question, do you have any of those in the comments of our videos?
Just to build it up. Why not?
I know Jeff does.
I definitely do.
All right, so let's take a look at Christian here. So he was born in Germany on February 21, 1961, but he told people he was born on February 29, 1960, which is the rarest birthday because it was leap day.
And I think that's why he did it.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a really rare birthday. Like, people are going to remember that. That's going to stick out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he kind of right away, even back to his birth, was framing himself as rare.
Plus, it gets him and a year older on his license, on whatever his passport or anything, his IDs.
If he ever had one, it's not clear. He never had a license in the U.S. He must have had a passport at some point.
He had to have had a passport because he traveled to the U.S. From Germany.
Yeah, so let's take a look at that. So in 1978, when he was actually 17, he met an American couple who was traveling in Germany. He traveled to the U.S. after this and used their names to gain entrance, saying they invited him to have a magical journey in California.
Mm-hmm.
Elmer and Jean Keln. Yeah.
And he would keep in touch with them for years. I don't know for how long exactly, but watched an interview with them, and he would contact them on occasion and show up at their house sometimes. And so, he kept in contact, which is surprising to me. He's keeping all these ruses up and still contacting and being around people that he was already conning under a different identity potentially, or maybe he's in between identities. So that seems dangerous to me to keep in contact with other people, you might become exposed at that point. You have run a greater chance of that. So surprised he did that.
Yeah, usually con artists really move on. When they change identities, they don't go back to anyone they used to know. They just cut them off because of that exact risk. Right. Now also you have to keep it straight, but he was pretty smart, so I'm sure he could keep the name straight.
Yeah, he didn't tell them he was going to do that either. Like he just used their name and told at U.S. Customs when he got here, "Oh yeah, I was invited by Elmer and Jean Kelm."
Yeah, they wouldn't have known. The people wouldn't have known.
Yeah, and in '78 they weren't really like super strict on that. Like ICE wasn't there going like, "Are you sure? You sure? You're from Germany?" Not sure I believe that. Like they were just like, "Okay, go on."
It was an open border compared to what we have now, that's for sure.
It really was.
So in the U.S., we see that Christian made his way to Connecticut, and he befriended a family. He did live with them, right? So that they actually did extend him the invitation, but he did tell them that he was a member of a wealthy family in Germany. This becomes another theme, this kind of mysterious background, some connection to aristocracy.
A desire to be seen as wealthy and important.
Mm-hmm.
That was my desire.
Now, at that time, he probably had a German accent, but later we see he switches over to a British accent. So in 1979, he becomes a foreign exchange student at a high school in Connecticut. He lived with the family there, and he wanted them to serve him breakfast every morning. Not surprisingly, they were aggravated by this.
Yeah.
Shocking.
He was not well liked by the family or by people in the high school, which isn't surprising because he was apparently very demanding individual.
Yeah, apparently I guess their daughter came home or something, and he refused to get off the couch to open the door for her, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and they kicked him out.
She stood outside for 45 minutes, apparently, in the cold. Like I think it was snowing, it was pretty cold that night. 45 minutes. So it paints a picture to me of he really didn't potentially didn't really care about many other people other than himself. There wasn't a lot of concern for the well-being of others.
His comfort was more important than letting her in from the cold.
Right. Or maybe, I don't know if he was, that couple, or I don't know if it was that couple. Somebody had said that he really liked staying up late watching movies and shows. So I'm curious if he was just sitting there watching a movie or a show and wasn't about to turn it off to go be disrupted or something. So you're right, more about his comfort.
Yeah, at this time he was going by the name Christopher Kenneth Gerhardt. So kind of close to his actual name. I mean, the initials are actually identical as well. So Christian then made his way to California to pursue a career in acting, like many con artists do. I don't know what it is about the acting profession. Maybe they feel like they are an actor already.
It's part of their life and their livelihood is being an actor. I'm an actor in the theater of life, so I might as well make some money out of it on camera. Mm-hmm. Why not?
All the world's to me a stage, right? And now I can make a music reference to the band Rush, which I said in the comments I was going to do. So there's a music reference. There we go.
More music references, yes.
You guys got the movie references. I got a music reference. We're good.
So, Mike, if you become a television producer, you could have encountered Gerhardsreiter.
If I had, it's possible I could have.
Yeah. Instead, you're a counselor. So
Instead, I'm a counselor. And I'm not likely to come in contact with them unless I seek it out.
You could become a counselor in prison.
In California. I'd have to go to California. But before he got to California, he stopped in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a while.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? So he was going to California to pursue his dream, but of all places, he stopped at the University of Wisconsin to take some classes. Yeah. And he met a 22-year-old woman there. She was from Madison, and they married in 1981. And I'm sure when they got married, they said things like, "To death do us part," and "happily ever after," and all this stuff.
Next day.
One day later.
One day later. Apparently, he really wanted to get his green card. He wanted to be a U.S. citizen. Of course, in 1981, which is when this happened, it was way easier to do that than it is today. Today, you have to go through a huge amount of paperwork and interviews with, like multiple interviews with customs agents and enforcement personnel just to make sure that you're really in love. You're really getting married for love and not because of, citizenship. And in 1981, they were like, "You're getting married? Okay, here you go. Here's your green card." Mm-hmm. And like that's what he wanted. He told her that if he was on the verge of getting deported back to Germany, mm-hmm. and that because he was from West Germany, they were going to send him to East Germany as to fight on the front of the Cold War with the Russians, and just like made up a whole big thing about that. And this poor woman agreed. She didn't want to see him go off to war, like be placed in a position where he might have to fight the Russians barehanded, or maybe with a knife. I don't know. Like, he probably made it out to be like really life and death kind of thing. So, and I could understand the wanting to help out. Mm-hmm. So she married him. And the next day.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, I mean, these days they're much more strict. It would actually be a crime to do for both of them what they did. But back then, you could tell people that's what you're going to do, and you wouldn't be arrested. It was a much different time.
Interestingly enough, she didn't file for divorce until 11 years later.
Well, she was holding out hope, I guess.
I guess she was hoping that he would come back.
Today's going to be the day.
He'll come through that door.
He must be in the war. He's coming back. Coming back from war.
Either that or it was just, oh, well, that was nothing. Oh, well. So, and then just forgot about it until she wanted to get married again. And then somebody's like, oh, you're still married. Oh, right. I forgot to take care of that.
So again, we see disregard for others. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe you guys know for sure, but I'm not sure exactly what he told her or didn't tell her. If he told her he was leaving or if coming back, I don't know. But at the very least, it would say to me that didn't really care what she thought or wanted. Also, he was able to manipulate her into this marriage. So he's got a lot of key skills here that would carry him through his entire con artist career.
I mean, given that he liked to pick up like TV tropes and things like that, I imagine he told her he was going out for cigarettes. And just never came by. The problem is he did that too early. You're supposed to wait till you have the kid before you do that. And then, that way the kid can have a tragic backstory. But yeah, he just up and took off, hit the road, and went to California.
Yes, I remember in the case of, I think it's Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, mm-hmm. he was married to an attorney at one point who took years to divorce him. So it might just be that, divorce is a lot of paperwork, right? And it's like, what's the rush if it doesn't affect anything? So it could have just been something she had on the back burner, like on her calendar, she keeps moving it.
It's like, well, he's not coming back. I don't think he's ever coming back, so...
I think it costs a lot of money to legally get a divorce too, doesn't it?
It can. Yeah. It can.
Maybe that was a factor.
Not just having to split your stuff down the middle, but if you have stuff. But it actually costs to file.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious what kind of stuff Gerhardsreiter had at that point, if anything. Like what he knew he was going to live this transient kind of lifestyle.
A couple of book bags, some books.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, some university book bags, yeah.
That would come back together.
Yeah, that'll come back. Spoiler alert.
So by the time he left Wisconsin, we see now his English was described by others as perfect. And he was saying he was a British royal related to Lord Mountbatten, a well-known British naval officer.
See, he was an aristocrat. Jeff, he took your thing.
Yeah. He didn't go with counseling. He went with the aristocrat way.
All I had to do was lie my way through things. If I could have made it.
If you just lied.
If only I'd known. I guess there's still time, right?
Yeah, I suppose there is. You're not dead. I mean, you could start lying about it. Jeff Pincin is now an aristocrat.
And now it's done. I've made it.
So Christian made his way to California after his extended marriage there. He went to San Marino, and he lived in the guest house of a woman named Ruth Sohus, who went by the name Dee Dee. And Dee Dee had a real problem with alcohol. I don't know if it caused her death, but she did die, I think, in 1988. So she did not live long past when this happened at all. Mm-hmm. And not long enough to see many of the things that would occur that were horrible in this case. So he was using the name Christopher Chichester at this point. So
this is name number, 4?
He's changed a few times here.
Changed a few times. It's like Gerhardsreiter, Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, and then he changed it to
Christopher
Gerhardt. Christopher Gerhardt.
Yep.
and then he went by
Chichester.
Chichester. Yeah, Christopher Kenneth Gerhardt, and then Chichester. So this is alias number 3.
Now, I had heard somewhere that he pronounced it Chichester, like to get a real English kind of spin to it, or something to possibly have some kind of connection there. This was the time, I think. Oh no, he was out in California at that point. So I don't know. I don't know if he was trying to get some kind of connection to royalty or something like that. But I had heard Chichester or Chichester.
Yeah, there's a in Pennsylvania. There's a Chichester Road, and they're not far from
Chichester, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Chichester. That's right. Yeah. So I didn't even think about an alternate pronunciation, but I usually don't.
Guess that's what we're used to here in Delaware. You know about Chichester in Pennsylvania. So I mean, but I can hear the British. My name is Chichester. Christopher Chichester.
Now, Chichester, Pennsylvania is not a royalty kind of place. That's
definitely not.
If you moved there, though,
it would become
that's my That's actually near where I was born, in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and that's where my parents were born and grew up. And so my dad always has all kinds of jokes about Delaware County and Chichester and all kinds of stuff. So it doesn't hold a very favorable view in my mind because of those running jokes. I'm sure Delaware County is a great place, but it wasn't, from my parents' experience, it wasn't the kind of place they talked favorably of all the time. So,
yes. So just so viewers from different locations, because this gets confusing, we live in the state of Delaware. It's the very first state, actually.
I tend to live in the state of confusion most of the time.
Which is nearby. Pennsylvania is a much larger state that we're essentially a suburb of here in Delaware, that has a Delaware County, which is the closest county to Delaware. So it's like you drive from Delaware, state of, to Delaware County of. There's also a Kent County, Delaware, and there's a Kent County, Maryland. Right? So people around here, whoever settled this area, the colonists, they weren't worried about like a variety of names.
It gets more confusing when you consider like both Delaware County and the state of Delaware got their name from the Delaware Valley and the Delaware River. And the Delaware River runs through the Delaware Valley, which is why Delaware County is named Delaware County, because most of the Delaware Valley, but part of it goes into the state of Delaware, and it can get really confusing unless you live here your entire life and just go, okay, yeah.
Whatever. I think we can blame William Penn primarily for a lot of this confusion. Because he owns Pennsylvania and Delaware, and then it split off. Separation Day, we celebrate Separation Day down here in Delaware. So I think William Penn's probably to blame, at least for part.
Yeah, I picture a bunch of colonists standing around looking at a river, looking at a valley. What do you think? Delaware? Yeah, we're done. We're not going to. Next item. How about Delaware? Didn't we use that? Look, I got things to do.
The whole valley. We're just going to pull the whole valley, the river, everything you see. Delaware. Okay, moving on. Next thing. Next item on the agenda.
I think it was Lord De La Warr that Delaware gets its name from.
Yeah, there was some type of radius from a certain point for that rounded top. Yeah. Yeah, Newcastle County is actually the oldest county. It's the first county in the United States, the county we live in right here.
Yeah. Which also is where William Penn landed when he got over here. He landed in Old Newcastle.
And here, you didn't think you were going to get a history lesson.
History!
You got it.
Yeah. There's also a Newcastle City, not to be confused with the county. Yeah, there's a lot of reusing of names.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of reusing of names.
It reminds me of Springfield, The Simpsons. They selected that because there are more Springfields than any other.
Right. But what state is Springfield in? We'll never know.
The age-old question.
It is the age-old question.
Well, they've given so many clues that they're actually contradictory, right? You can't. It's unsolvable.
Right. The state that Springfield is in borders, 5 contiguous states that do not touch anywhere in the United States.
That's such a great show, Simpsons.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. That's a nice tangent right there.
If I'm not mistaken, Conan O'Brien wrote my favorite episode of The Simpsons, which was the one with Leonard Nimoy, Monorail.
That was a great episode.
I had a Phil Hartman too, which my favorite from The Simpsons. But yeah, I think Monorail was like just almost perfect. It was the Back to the Future of Simpsons episodes.
I'll agree. Monorail was a great episode. Yeah. Very, very good episode.
My favorite was when Spoiler alert for Simpsons. When Homer took the class to become the conductor, and I think a lot of things in life work this way. This is what I think is funny. And Phil Hartman's character leaves we're getting ready to leave the room. Like, who's the conductor?
That guy.
That's like 99% of success in the United States, right?
And that's why Jeff didn't become an aristocrat,
I
because
was
nobody
not
said,
in the right
that
place
guy.
at the right time. That's all. I got to be in more places. That's what it is.
Got to be in more places. Apparently, Christopher Chichester, was in all of the places. He was in all of the
He
places.
made sure of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and we talked about Dee Dee, Ruth Sohas. She had a son, Jonathan, who was married to a woman named Linda, and like they had just gotten married at the point where Christopher was living in the guest house, and they were living with her because I believe Jonathan didn't have a job or had they had just gotten married and were really like hard up, so they were living with her. She was drunk most of the time, but the two of them then went on vacation. Their honeymoon. They took their honeymoon.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And there was confusion in the neighborhood about this guest house because I guess, I don't know if it was zoning or how it worked, but Dee Dee was not allowed to have a tenant. I don't know if she rented the house from somebody or, again, I don't know why, but she wasn't allowed. So they kept it kind of murky as to where Christian actually lived. I think it only added to confusion. In 1985, Jonathan and Linda disappeared.
Yeah. They supposedly went on their honeymoon and were never seen again.
Mm-hmm. And it disappeared without a trace, too. And the weirdest part of that was Christopher Chichester, Gerhardsreiter, said to Dee Dee that he was kind of he would relay information. They'd gone on some top secret something to New York, and he was the one that was relaying information. And I mean, she was elderly, so I imagine she didn't really, didn't know. But
he told her all sorts of things about they're in the CIA. And I can't really tell you anything more than that, but I'll give you what information I can here or there. And it's really, really classified stuff. And then it wasn't really without a trace, because there were postcards.
all right, yeah.
Remember the postcards that came in?
Yeah.
Dee Dee was really the perfect target for Gerhardsreiter, elderly, living by herself at the time when he moved in, alcoholic.
Needed the money.
And yeah, she had money, and I heard somebody describe her as eccentric. So, she's probably going to give him money if he asked for it.
No, I meant she needed the money.
Oh, she needed the money, yeah.
Yeah, and she kind of entered into the, I don't know if it was illegal, but the arrangement she wasn't supposed to. So now he kind of had something over her with the whole guest house business.
It was a weird thing because she actually had quite a bit of money, but it was all tied up in investments. She didn't have any. She wasn't liquid. Like when she died, I think she had like $180,000 worth of assets that were like liquefied, that had been liquefied afterwards. But she'd sold that house, and like when she died, she was living in a trailer, but she had the $180,000 left over, and she removed Jonathan from her will.
Right.
And it got split up to several charities, but and a few of her other relatives. But yeah, she had money, but it was all like tied up. So she was using Gerhardsreiter, Chichester at that point to bring in like liquid cash. Like it would pay her rent I think it was per week that he was there, and so she would have cash on hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they kind of needed each other. But I agree, Jeff. I think that he targeted her. Like she fit a profile that he felt he could exploit. He often targeted women on top of that. So, she fit that as well. But yeah, there was with the postcards and letters that were ostensibly coming in from secret agents Jonathan and Linda. Later they were tested and their DNA was not on there, but neither was Christian's.
This is a detail I want to save for later on, but this wouldn't be the first time like postcards would be a thing with him. Okay, that would come up later. More information would come up later about postcards and Gerhardsreiter, and postcards from Europe, which was a big thing because the postcards that Dee Dee and some of her other and some of Linda's other friends got were from like Paris, and like one of them said something like we were aiming for New York and kind of missed. I guess I can deal with this. And there's a postcard from Paris. And and that's kind of like, if it's real, it's a lovely little thing. Hey, we meant to go to New York, but kind of decided to go to Paris instead. It's a lovely little thing, but never seen again. That's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it was a thing in the mid-'80s to disappear to Europe and just never, return in person. But, Christian was very convincing. Now,
he stayed in the area for a few weeks after they left on their honeymoon, and would tell other people that they had gone on their honeymoon and that they'd left on purpose and things like that. And so he was still there for a couple weeks afterwards. And then he left.
Yeah, he went to Greenwich, Connecticut in a 1985 Nissan pickup truck that was registered to Jonathan Sohas.
Now, I had heard that he went to the original family we had talked about, the Keln family, that he had stopped by their house, and the son of the Keln, the couple, I forget their names, but their son, saw him in the truck with a woman in the passenger seat, and he described that woman as, I think he said, larger, and that's how they described Linda Sohas. So it's possible that was a sighting, the last known sighting of Linda. And the son had described that she had recently been crying. Like he could tell that she had recently been upset and recently been crying. So that adds another layer of mystery onto this and unknown things. And if that's the case, we know that nobody that I know of saw, when he went over to Connecticut, nobody saw a woman with him over there. So if that's the case, between California and Connecticut, somewhere he loses Linda. And no matter, depending on what he did or something or didn't do. But that's a layer of mystery that really adds another wrench to this, that I don't know that anybody knows any other details than that.
Yeah, and we find out later that where Jonathan's remains were located, Linda wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. They never found her. Right. And we'll talk about that. But yeah, so it makes sense. Maybe he was...
Another spoiler alert, John Sohas died.
Yeah, things didn't work out too well for him, as it turns out.
But when he got to Greenwich, he was using a different name.
Yeah, he
changed his name again. When he was pulled over by the cops in the green pickup truck. He was using a different name.
Yep, Christopher Crowe.
Christopher Crowe.
Now, this one he had taken from somebody who was a television producer in Los Angeles.
Oh, my goodness.
And it matched it. See, that's
crazy.
Could have been you.
It's insane. just coincidences.
Time to switch your name, Mike.
Right? Apparently. I'm going to go by Christopher Crowe apparently from now on.
So here's where we get into a mystery, the mystery of this pickup truck. It probably doesn't matter, but I find it interesting. I think this is an artifact of how deceptive and how many moves that Christian made. It's not clear how exactly we find out about the pickup truck. One story is he gave the vehicle to somebody, they went to DMV and tried to register it and they got caught. Another story is he was trying to sell it to the son of a local minister, and the same thing happened when they tried to register it. It came back as belonging to Sohas. There's reports for both. Who knows what happened? But either way, he had that truck the whole time, and he gave the title and the truck to somebody and said, for money or just for free, here you go. Instead of destroying it, trying to get rid of the vehicle, this huge piece of evidence potentially that connects him back to Jonathan. He was not really concerned.
Yeah, but it would be a long time before that. Like, it was flagged, but it'd be a long time before anybody checked on that. This was late 1985 when this was happening. So it would be a long time before the internet became a big enough thing to run background check on the car or on the truck. But by the time they would later find John Sohas' remains, they had that technology. I think that's when it was discovered, shortly after
Right. The police made an important discovery. Chichester and Crow were the same person. Mm-hmm. They didn't know who that person was, but they knew they were the same person.
It makes sense to me, going back to the confusion about how the truck was found. It would make sense to me that, I think you said one of the ones was that he got pulled over in the truck. If I remember correctly, the police were not able to question Gerhardsreiter. He left before they could do that. So it makes sense to me that maybe he had tried to sell it or give it away or something. But it's something, at some point he had enough time to be able to get away from the police. So something happened there where he had some time.
Yeah, I think the pullover incident happened in addition to trying to get rid of the truck because he had a girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
And not Sandra Boss, we'll get to her later, but he had a girlfriend and the police contacted her and they wanted to talk to him and she just kept stonewalling them and somehow that worked. Like somehow the police were like, well, okay. Now remember at this point though, Jonathan had not been found. He was just a missing person.
Right.
And he was missing with his wife. So some people did think they just ran off.
Yeah. And because of the things like the postcards, there wasn't a big push to get the police involved in looking at them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he certainly wasn't going to file charges about the Nissan. They couldn't even find Jonathan, right? So in a way, I mean, they probably should have investigated more. Clearly they should have, but they kind of gave up when the girlfriend wouldn't put him on the phone.
But it was difficult for them to really make real headway figuring out anything to connect back to John Sohaus. Like the Connecticut police had no reason to believe that John Sohaus was missing. And the California police didn't know that John Sohaus's truck was in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. There was very little in the way of communication or connection there. And it was much more difficult to make those connections at that point.
Maybe these were the same police that were involved with Kristen Smart later. Like there's a truck and they're not really investigating it like they should. They're thinking, oh, maybe they just went away somewhere. Or maybe that, so we're not really going to look into it too much. Maybe they just went away somewhere. I see some similarities here. So it might have been the same people.
Yeah. Maybe they went to the same police academy. The one from the movies.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
They just learned how to make sound effects with their mouth or something.
He's seen that movie.
That's right. I've seen it.
There's like 160
yeah, there are
police
a bunch of police
I guess the
academies.
odds were pretty good. I was going to say it.
Yeah, but the original was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. By today's standards, it would be offensive. And
Very much
things
so.
changed a lot.
Very much so.
But we got to see it when it happened, and then it was funny. So
I didn't get to.
In the context of the time, it was funny.
yeah. Now, it wouldn't even last 20 seconds. And yeah.
No, not at all.
So something big happens in 1994.
Well, a bit before that, there was he was using the Christopher Crow name,
Right.
but some of his work history was interesting. One real big point was really interesting to me. He was working for a brokerage firm. He got a job in Connecticut. He was working for the brokerage firm S.N. Phelps Company, working on the firm's computers and stuff. And he got fired because the social security number he was using belonged to David Berkowitz.
Yeah, it wasn't a smart move for him.
It was not a smart move. But he would then work several other jobs. Briefly
Going back for a moment to Berkowitz, because I think this is hysterical. That name doesn't necessarily mean a lot today, but, well, he's still a pretty big figure. But back then, his killings had just occurred. Yeah. And this was the Son of Sam killer and the .44 caliber killer. He used a 5-shot revolver. It's a Charter Arms Bulldog, a very unusual weapon that fires .44 special. Not .44 Magnum, like Dirty Harry, but .44 special, which is still a very powerful round. And he would go up to people in New York and essentially just shoot them at very close range. It was a terrible shot, but he managed to, I think he killed 7 people. Mm-hmm. So to pick Berkowitz, of all people, I mean, a guy who's still alive now and was, of course, alive then, an unusual choice of Social Security number.
I think it was one he could get a hold of easily.
The price was right.
Well,
it's free.
I was about to say, I wonder if he knew whose Social Security number he was getting. Like maybe it was just, hey, I got this Social Security number he got from some whatever. And I'm curious if he knew or if that was a shock to him. Like, oh, I don't know. Maybe I didn't realize it either, or something.
Just figure it's like 1 in 100 million to get like Berkowitz, but who knows? I mean, maybe it was published somewhere. I don't know why it would have been. Maybe it was published and he just thought this is an easy one to grab, like maybe in a newspaper or there weren't blogs or anything back then, so I don't know. Yeah, but Berkowitz is interesting. He's still in prison. He did a series with some type of church where he's trying to get out. He's saying he's born again and
he's no longer a satanic,
that's right. He's
cult follower.
He's not listening to his dog anymore.
Well, he denies ever listening to the dog. The Sam was the neighbor's dog, and he really resents the whole dog thing. And he's in prison for life for killing people, yet he's mad about the dog thing. Yeah. I think it's a priority problem, maybe, right? It's not the biggest mistake if they think the dog was talking to you at this point, right? I got news for you.
With Christopher Crowe would abandon that particular name when he found out that the police were actually looking for him in connection with John and Linda Sohas' disappearance. And it would be then, like after that, he would form the next identity.
Right, James Frederick Mills Clark Rockefeller. And you just go by Clark Rockefeller.
That's a bold move, choosing Rockefeller as your last name.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a bold move.
Yeah, but one, where he was that paid off. Now, there's some other jobs he had, right? He worked as a sales manager for a corporate bond department. Mm-hmm. And when he was hired, the people in the office were like, who is this guy? He has no experience, no education. He never sold a bond the entire time he was there. Made $150,000 a year, it's estimated. And he got fired, but the guy the guy who hired him thought he was an aristocrat and didn't check his background, just took him at his word and made him I think it was a VP. So
background checks were a little bit harder to do back then.
And then he went to another firm, Kidder Peabody and Company in Manhattan, another prestigious, well-known firm that you would think would just make sure somebody was a real person, right? And he quit that, though, because the police were coming after him.
They were sniffing around. It's time to get rid of Christopher Crowe.
I heard somebody, I think it was his boss or somebody he worked with, one of those companies, said some things about him, and I don't know if he would have said the same thing at the time, but he made comments like he's kind of this quiet loner and kind of guy that you expect to maybe come in one day and shoot up the place, things like that. And it wasn't what I expected. I expected him to be real extroverted and talking to people all the time and making conversation all the time, which he may have done at times to keep up that ruse of the aristocracy and that he knew people and things like that. But for somebody to describe him as a loner, that doesn't really fit in with my perception of what Gerhardsreiter was like.
Well, I think Christopher Crowe at that time was going through some really big problems. Like Christian Gerhardsreiter would have been doing a lot of different things, but Christopher Crowe was really like he'd been a movie producer and he'd been producing the Alfred Hitchcock Presents remake in 1985, and then suddenly he's down on his luck and working at Kidder Peabody and Company. Like, why would he be happy-go-lucky?
That's a good point.
I'm just saying, Christopher Crowe had a down time during that time period.
Point. That's a good point. I had heard this would go back, I think, in the timeline, but I also heard somebody describe the way. No, I'm sorry. This was the limo driver, the SUV driver. We'll see later, but described him as talking like what's his name, Thurston Howell.
Right,
the third from
Gilligan's Island.
Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, that was actually Christian indicated that he picked that character, and that's where he got his accent.
Okay,
which is hysterical. I talk about that in the video I did on the other channel. How that's all it took to fool these people, these so-called elites.
Right.
Like he infiltrated this whole crowd on Thurston Howell III.
It was like arguably the worst presentation of a rich person ever.
Well, it was all the stereotypes of the time, right?
So every single stereotype of every single rich person just rolled up in one horrible, awful character. I mean, I love Gilligan's Island. I love the character, but as a caricature of rich people, it's horrible.
Well, just like, my favorite character was the professor, but he again was he knew everything.
Right.
He did. He knew everything.
But not enough to get off the island.
What are you a professor of? What class do you teach?
Not island studies, apparently.
It's not oceanography, I'll tell you that.
Or boat studies or something.
No, definitely not marine, marine architecture, engineering.
So while this was going on, we see this jumping from job to job. Bones were discovered in 1994 back near the guest house in California. So 1994, bones discovered in California. This is potentially bad news for now Rockefeller. They weren't identified at the time. People had a feeling of who they might be, but they weren't identified until 2010.
Yeah, they wouldn't be definitively identified, but a lot of people really believed that it was John Sohas's bones. And it's interesting because they weren't all in one place. They were in at least 3 different locations in the backyard. The police really went above and beyond, excavating the entire backyard to see what they could find, and they found a large amount of remains. And the other thing that they found was book bags located with the remains. One of them was from a University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and one of them was from a more local San Marino college that it's known that Christopher Chichester audited film classes at.
Right, and later, of course, they would discover eventually Gerhartsreiter had that connection to the University of Wisconsin. So this wasn't looking good, but they found nothing else. There was no DNA, no hair, no blood, nothing else on the remains. So they just had these bags, essentially.
And I think they were one of the medical examiners was able to determine that the cause of death was likely to be blunt force trauma to the head,
right?
Just because of fractures on the skull.
Yeah, so they didn't know a lot. So you would think, they find these bones and there would be like an arrest warrant and a chase, but nothing actually happened. It just stalled. Now, they didn't have the positive ID yet, which is a real problem for a murder case. It's very important to know who it is, because that gives you all the connections to where who the person would have seen. And
it was during that time period after those bones were found that they really wanted to start looking for Mr. Chichester. They started really looking. I think that's when they started making some connections, but not many. And then, of course, was when Christopher Crowe was like, "Nope, got to get out of here."
My understanding was they found the bones when the people who were living there were digging for a swimming pool. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how often that happens for people that dig for a living, whether road work or construction or pools or whatever. I don't know how often that happens, that you find something that's of interest to the police or somebody else, but I imagine that's not the most pleasant part of the job. Oh, we found this isn't looking good for our job.
Well, it happened in Poltergeist. That was a lot of bones, but it wasn't just one person. But they definitely found digging for a pool, and they found bones.
So maybe that means it happens all the time.
It could.
I mean, we've got 2 instances. I don't have any others. So
in Poltergeist, it was because they just moved the headstones from the graveyard down the street and then just built houses on top of it. But yeah, that wasn't the case in the Sohas incident. But yeah, they were looking, as far as we know. Yeah, maybe it was a graveyard. I don't know.
I just think being the guy who discovers the body under any circumstance always makes you a suspect, right, or a person of interest. I mean, always. I mean, unless there's video of somebody else committing the crime. Usually, I mean, obviously, somebody's going to discover the body. It doesn't mean the person who discovered did it, but automatically, the police are like, "Where have you been?"
I think in a situation like this, though, the police would, "Where have you been? We just moved into the house from Minnesota." I'll check on that. Yeah, they got a Minnesota accent, so yeah, I believe it. Yeah. Plus, it'd been 10 years, and the house had been sold a couple of times by that point.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they didn't do it, but it's just, the police sometimes, as we've noted in some of these murder parts, they don't always look real hard beyond the people that are in the room when they first show up.
Well, sometimes you just say they don't really look too hard. Full stop.
Right? Period. Yeah.
And then, beyond who's in the room, we'll talk in the Michael Morton case, like they just, oh, it must be him. He's the husband. And then moving on. But they target one person and then just, nail down and bear down on that one person. Sometimes they get the wrong person.
There was good.
No, I was going to say, in this case, it appears that the family that found the bones were, immediately kind of.
Oh, right, yeah. And the people that dug, and they were digging in the backyard. But there's a case a very famous case in Australia. Edgar, what was his name? Eric Edgar Cook is a serial killer who a little bit like Richard Ramirez. He kind of had a random nature. He used cars. He'd run women down. He shot people. He shot one guy in the face. He answered the door in his house. He shot him in the face. I think he strangled someone with a lamp cord. He stabbed another woman. So just erratic. The police didn't know it was one killer. They didn't know it was Eric Edgar Cook for a while. 2 other people were convicted in 2 separate murders he committed, falsely convicted.
Wow.
I mean, it just makes you wonder, like, what are the police doing? Interestingly, in both cases, the people confessed.
Yeah, false confessions are a thing.
They did not do it.
Wow.
They did not do it, and they confessed. They were both exonerated and eventually paid, I think, a few $100,000 each. But Australia is different. They didn't go to prison for life. It was like, I think the one did 15 years and one did 5. Because one was manslaughter, because Eric ran down this woman with a car, and it was kind of bad luck because the boyfriend had been in a fight with her just before, and she was walking home, and he was behind her in his car saying, hey, get in the car. And then he stopped to smoke a cigarette. Eric ran the girl over. Then the boyfriend resumed to try to find her and found her laying on the ground. Talk about terrible, terrible luck.
Yeah, really.
Jeez.
It looked really, I mean, it was definitely a false conviction.
He'd
but
probably thinking he did it
Right,
himself. Like, did I run her over on accident? Oh my God.
this looks really convincing. Yeah.
Really bad.
Yeah.
And the front license plate is off of my car. And there's a damage to the light. Of course, that happened with the accident I got into last week, but still.
That was terrible, terrible luck. But both of them were exonerated. But it just shows you, I mean, this was a very random criminal. When there's no pattern, the police just start looking at boyfriends, basically, right?
Husband did it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see now we move to 1995. So again, no police are in pursuit. So Christian's living his life. He marries a woman named Sandra Boss. She has an education that includes Stanford and Harvard. She works at a consulting firm, making a lot of money. By today's standards, that would be a lot.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot. I can't understate how much money that she was making.
$2 million a year or 40,000 a week. I don't know if those equate to the same thing, but those are 2 that I had heard.
I think that's the same, right? 20,000 a week is $1 million, I believe.
Something like that, yeah.
About roughly $1 million.
I'm not good at math. That's why I went into counseling.
He could have been a mathematician.
Could have been a mathematician, decided to go into counseling. Actually, I don't think he ever would have been a mathematician. I think that's what he's saying. It's like,
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Not good at math. So decided to do stuff with words instead.
So we see that how did these 2 meet? They met at a Clue party, which is something you do not hear of these days, but I thought this was hysterical. So this is a board game that was made a long time ago. It was Parker Brothers that made it, right?
I believe so. We have Sam check on that.
Maybe Sam can check Clue. But the movie, Clue, which was really well done. It's Tim Curry.
Tim Curry, great.
And the guy from Back to the Future, Christopher Lloyd. Yeah, Christopher Lloyd did a great job in there. Actually, everybody pretty much did a great job.
It is one of those almost perfect movies.
It's very precise.
It really holds up too, because it's set as a period piece. It's set in the 1950s.
1954, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. So it's still an older movie, but a really well done film, and we see that basically with these games, people would play the characters. I think that Christian was Professor Plum.
I think so.
I can't remember who Sandra was, but
there's an interesting factoid about the movie. Like if you watch the movie now, like on DVD or something like that, you get 3 different endings. Like ever since it got put on video, you get 3 different endings. So like this is how it could have happened. This is how it could have happened. But here's what really happened. When it was actually initially released in theaters, you got one ending. They sent out the 3 different endings to different theaters across the country. So if you saw the movie like in New York and saw the one ending where
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. So you see the one ending where Miss Scarlet does it.
Right.
Then that's where it ended. Like it ended after Miss Scarlet did it, and you're like, oh crap, Miss Scarlet did it. But if you're somewhere across the country and you do where Miss Peacock did it, you can think Miss Peacock did it, and then there's the one where like everybody did it.
Right. Which I still like the best.
Which I think is the best. It is the best ending, but different people. It was a big thing because the media went like, wait, what What's the real ending to this movie? Like, we were talking to people, they've seen the movie.
Mass confusion.
And it was a big confusion. I mean, they came out on video, they're like, there's 3 endings. There's 3 different endings. You can watch them all on the video. And then people went really grabbed it because they wanted to see what the other endings were. It's a big thing.
I should have said, I've seen this one. Another movie I've seen.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
we're on a roll tonight.
Yeah,
guys.
on a roll.
Clue's a sleeper because when you're watching the movie at first, it's really, I think, kind of boring at first. But then you start realizing that everything is deliberate. Mm-hmm. It's actually a really complex the way it goes through. Although I think the one ending was kind of lazy. The middle one in the DVD was it with
Peacock?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I felt that one was a little like they disregarded a lot of other clues, but it was a clever film and a lot of action kind of running through this house and the characters. It was well acted too.
Oh, yeah.
It was very well acted. It was one of the only really good like board game to movie adaptations. Like Battleship was terrible.
That was that should be buried at the bottom of the ocean.
Ooh, should be just tossed into the bottom of the ocean the way they tossed.
Yeah, I think they jumped in like, well, spoiler alert for Battleship, but they jumped into Missouri. I think it was. Like, I mean, it doesn't work that way. It's not like a car. You start the engine. You know?
No, it doesn't work that way. But the Clue Party thing was they would watch the movie, they would play the board game, and have some. And I think some of them it was kind of a cosplay thing. Like you dress up as the character that you're going as. Right. So, going as Professor Plum, you dress in kind of purple because that's the purple one. Mm-hmm. And you dress as the character you're going, and you play the game, play the board game, and kind of have fun. So Clark Rockefeller met Sandra Boss at one of these parties.
Yeah, so it's ironic because it's the mission is to figure out who killed the millionaire host, right? So something predicting what would happen in the future, maybe, but
foreshadowing.
So Sandra is an interesting person. I believe she's still around. I think she returned to work after this and continue with her life. But she was extremely. What's that?
I believe she's living in England now.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right.
They moved to England.
Yeah, that's right. She's extremely competitive, shy, and motivated. She thought that Christian was the brightest person she ever met. She found him charming, witty, and worldly. And apparently, this is something that a lot of people said. Even people who didn't like him and saw through him. Said that he really understood a lot about the world. He was very well read, poetry, literature, like European literature. Like he really seemed cultured. He understood antiquity, like Rome and Greece, and like he didn't just know those things at the surface. He really understood them. He had intelligent conversations about these topics, and I think that really helped him a lot in fooling people. He also spoke Klingon. Now this one I don't understand because
it's a real language.
It's a real language.
It exists.
But usually, if you're trying to pretend you're an aristocrat, you would go for something like French, German, maybe Spanish, not Klingon.
Maybe there's a very specific subset of the aristocracy that are
Star Trek fans.
all about Klingon, Star Trek. Maybe that's what he's going for.
Well, 95 would have been really big. Star Trek would have been really big with Next Generation, and I believe Deep Space Nine was also on the air at that point, although I might be off on my year on Deep Space Nine.
Where were we with movies is the question. Wrath of Khan would have been out already.
Wrath of Khan was out in the 80s.
And 3 would have been out already.
3.
How about the one with the whales, number 4?
Yeah, that was late 80s. I think it was 89. So I think we've been in Undiscovered Country.
Oh, okay.
That one was terrible.
Not the best, yeah. I like.
We shouldn't have let Shatner direct, but the other point is like Gerhardsreiter was wanted to be an actor, so it really fits that he learned Klingon during that time period because that would broaden his range as an actor. Like I can do Klingon, and after the 60s, like it had been developed into a full language of its own. It's not just sounds the actors make. Like it is its own. It is an actual language that was created for the series. but it makes sense that he would. And if he's using everything he knows and everything he has to impress people, he'd absolutely bring that out. Be like, I know so many other languages. I even know made up language. Like, and that's impressive. Like that people like.
Point.
Yeah, I think in one of the places, what we'll get to when he moves to another town, he was in like a play where he dressed up, it looked like as a Roman soldier or something. There was a photo, some type of theater at the church where he was.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say Star Trek Generations was 1994. Star Trek First Contact was 1996.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know anything about these movies. Go ahead.
Yeah, Generations, I thought Generations and First Contact were both pretty good. But a lot of people don't like
I agree.
Don't like Shatner and Patrick Stewart together. And that ending, spoiler alert, but that ending was bad. But the rest of the movie, I really liked with them together. But, I mean, they weren't really together till the end. Yeah. Right? But I liked the movie. What are you going to do? Yeah. First Contact, I think, was one of the better ones.
It was. First Contact absolutely was one of the better ones.
Yeah. Another movie Jeff did not see.
No, I have no interest.
It's in sci-fi, so
Yeah, no interest
in it.
So go right ahead with it.
If you're going to see certain Star Trek movies, I would watch the one with the whales, 4.
The Voyage Home.
Yeah, The Voyage Home. Definitely. I would definitely say 4. I would go Generations and First Contact. I would say those 3.
Avoid Nemesis.
Yeah, Nemesis wasn't great. The Wrath of Khan with Ricardo Montalban was also really, really good. Older, it's the second one, I think. But
Yep. Same movie.
there's another Wrath of Khan, right? There's a newer, a sort of, right? Newer
Into
version.
Darkness.
Right.
I think it's Star Trek Into Darkness.
That one's actually not bad either.
I like the newer ones. Anyway, Mr. Rockefeller married Sandra Boss.
Right, they got married. They lived in New York. And something happened in a park. It's not really clear, but a woman made a complaint to the police about Christian, and he said, I want to move. Then we see they moved to New Hampshire. And this is where we get into this whole adventure. Now, the couple had a daughter not long after they moved to New Hampshire.
And we should say, too, that the wedding ceremony they had was a Quaker ceremony. It had no legal status, so it wasn't anything that was actually on the books, is my understanding.
Yeah.
That's my understanding as well. Gerhardsreiter, Clark Rockefeller, took control of their family finances very quickly after that wedding. Like, she would be bringing in the money, but he held the checkbook. Like, he made sure that he had control of everything. And he also made her file her taxes single.
Right.
Instead of married. She could have filed them married, but he made her file them as a single person. Because he was absolutely trying to keep his identity under wraps.
Yeah, he had no driver's license. He had no verifiable income. He didn't have his own cell phone. It was a friend that he would pay them, and they put it in their name. And yet, Sandra was not suspicious at first.
She said that he was charming. That obviously really liked him. But of course, that would change to controlling, abusive, really trying to bear down on her and not allow her to do many things. I imagine he was very paranoid all the time. And people would say that about his paranoia and how he would, I think a previous girlfriend, he made her walk on the other side of the street from him and not leave their apartment at the same time. So he could definitely be described as paranoid throughout many parts of his life from what people have said about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she actually described him as paranoid, but not delusional. Although later on, somebody would say, an expert would say he's delusional, one would say he's not. But so they're in New Hampshire. We see this weird thing in New Hampshire where, he generally tried to kind of have this mixture of laying low and also kind of trying to be impressive and, had fake artwork and expensive clothes and all this. But he does this thing at some sort of, I don't know what this was, like a church meeting or a town hall or something, where he says, I'll give you $110,000 if you sell me the church for $1. He talked about some sort of church in his hometown of Europe, somewhere in Europe, where he was going to move the church over to New Hampshire. I guess a big helicopter. I don't know how you move an entire church, a cathedral, actually. And he just made a lot of unusual claims. He was in this theater thing I talked about where he was dressed up, wearing like a breastplate, and I think he had like a shield and a helmet. Really, he liked attention. We see the actor part kind of comes out. did not lay low at all.
No, I mean, he told friends and neighbors that he graduated from Yale and owned businesses in Canada. And like he managed to get memberships to the Algonquin Club in Boston.
And be a director of that as well until his arrest.
He became a director. And he spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, and we see, so this is May 2001 where they have their daughter. And then we go all the way to 2006 before they move again. And they bought a $2.7 million home in Boston. And this same year is when Sandra Boss, finally the suspicions kind of catch up and she can't keep them under wraps anymore. She hires a PI.
Right. Yeah, she said that he was so unpleasant to live with that she finally had decided she'd had enough. The move into the new house was kind of the breaking point because he still was holding the purse strings like super tight, wouldn't let her make decisions about what was going on in the house that they were moving into. And she's like, I'm done. I want to get out. And he was more and more controlling and more abusive. And finally, she hired a private investigator.
I would imagine. So at the trial, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but at the trial,
Which one?
That's right.
I don't know, one of them. But Sandra Boss would testify, and they would ask her. She's a very educated woman, of course, and they would ask her, "How did you allow all this to happen? Why didn't you figure this out?" And so I'm, trying to put myself in her shoes. And so I have somebody who's very charming. Obviously, has deceived a ton of people at very high levels as well, with jobs and lots of people with money. I imagine that he was able to say the right things at the right time. And even to a very educated woman who knew a lot of things, was very good at business and probably many other things, that it would take that long. That's very surprising. But at the same time, he was also that good at it. And there was also the aspect of love, I imagine, as well, that you're kind of blind sometimes when you're in love. So it's very, extremely surprising that it took that long. But at the same time, I'd like to think that I would, be able to pick up on something like that. But I don't know that I would. If she couldn't do it until that long, it took her that long, I imagine that the average person that's not that highly educated maybe would have maybe even a more difficult time.
Well, I think given the nature of abuse and the abuse cycle, there's a whole cycle of abuse that starts with that honeymoon period, where the person who engages in the abusive activities is very charming, is very wonderful, is very loving and doting, and then they begin to become a little bit controlling. It happens a little bit at a time. A little bit controlling of what the other person is doing. And then there's an aspect of isolating that person away from their family and friends, trying to keep them to themselves. And then once they've got them pretty isolated, it becomes emotionally abusive. The controlling ramps up. The isolation continues even more. And then if it becomes physical, the physical abuse comes in. And then there's a huge blow-up moment, almost always. Right. And then there's contrition. There's, I'm so sorry. This will never happen again. I'm really apologize. And then, saying the right things and bringing back. And then the honeymoon period starts.
I'll change.
This will never happen again. It's never going to happen again. And then the cycle starts all over with the honeymoon period. And then it just cycles through. And the cycles can take time and be so gradual. And each time the cycle goes through, it gets a little bit worse. Mm-hmm. And this can happen so gradually that nobody can, the person who's receiving that suddenly, like, it's been 10 years and I didn't realize how I got here. And from the outside, we can look in and be like, you're being abused. Like, this is a terrible thing. Like, get out of the situation. But the responsibility of the individual who's in that position is to take care of themselves. And sometimes, very often, the safest thing to do is stay. Which is very unfortunate, but I've had clients who I've had to advise that, like, well, I want to get out of this relationship. Okay, well, you can't just leave right now, because that could be even more dangerous. And there are many, many people in prison who are there because they killed or seriously injured their victim because they decided to leave.
Yeah, well, especially when there's a lot of notice when it's, look, I'm leaving, they go and get their stuff. unfortunately, sometimes it is better to sneak away, which takes planning. But we see some really high-profile cases where the heat of the moment murder was a situation where the perpetrator knew the person was trying to leave, like Lisa Harnham in Australia, another Australian case where he threw her out of a balcony. He grabbed her, like she's like, I'm leaving. After it was a terrible abuse, went on for a while, and he grabbed her, and there's video, surveillance of him pulling her back to the apartment, and then she flies off the balcony, and he was convicted, as presumed, that he threw her off. There was actually a witness that saw somebody matching his description do that. But if Lisa Harnham had said, okay, I'm not going anywhere, and then just left without telling him, would have been safer. But in the moment, that's never occurs to people because of the way they come to the conclusion they have to leave.
Right.
It's not in people's nature to necessarily be sneaky, but sometimes it pays to be sneaky.
Yeah, sometimes it does. And sometimes it becomes necessary to maintain your safety. And it's even harder when there are children involved.
Right.
Because not only you have to worry about your own safety, but you have to worry about the safety of the child and making sure you can break ties without this person finding out. And this actually become very important in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Sandra Boss hired that private investigator in 2006 and very quickly found out that Clark Rockefeller was not a real person.
Not who he said he was.
He was not who he said he was. They discovered that he was Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter.
Yeah, I think at this point, did they figure that out, or is it still? I thought the PI told Sandra that we don't know who he is, but he's not Clark Rockefeller.
Yeah, they didn't learn his real name at that time, but they said that he's not Clark Rockefeller.
Yeah. So again, an amazing testament to how much confusion you can cause by switching identity. Something that seems simple, but Christian did it very effectively and really maximized the damage.
Yeah. When she learned that, she decided divorce. That's it. Done.
Yeah, and this was shaping up to be a messy, high-dollar divorce, but Christian came up with an idea that was, I think, pretty well shocking to everybody. Give me $800,000 and some knickknacks, basically, and I'll split. But I do want to see my daughter for 24 hours a year, 3 visits, 8 hours, and he was fine with supervision. Yeah. I've never heard of a request like that.
Yeah.
Usually, if you're asking for that much money, you're just going to say, I'm not worried about visitation. But he put that in there. And that probably seemed like a reasonable deal from Sandra's perspective because, it ends what would have been a very expensive divorce.
And it's weird. Some of those knickknacks were weird. It was $800,000, 2 cars, which I get. Mm-hmm. I can understand the cars. Bit of a car guy, so I can understand it. He wanted her engagement ring, which I can kind of get. He also wanted a dress that he gave her. I don't know why he wanted the dress.
Yeah, it was a peculiar assembly of personal property.
I wonder if that was an element of control. Like maybe there was a story with the dress, or maybe that meant something to them, and it's like, well, I want the dress. And maybe it was her favorite, or maybe it meant something to their relationship or something. That's the only conclusion I could come to, that he's trying to, just with this whole thing, he's trying to show some kind of manipulation there with all of his demands.
Like it's a jab at her. It's like, I'm going to take that one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know just how to press your button here. And keep doing it, even though you're divorcing me. Like I have the upper hand, is the message perhaps that he's trying to display.
Yeah, so very odd arrangement. Sandra jumps on it. She takes their daughter and moves to London. But of course, daughter has to fly back for these supervised visits. One would occur on July 27, 2008. And this was a social worker. It was a guy who was assigned to supervise. So it was Christian, his daughter, the social worker. They're walking in Boston, Massachusetts. And out of nowhere, an SUV pulls up. Now, this was arranged in advance, so Christian knew what this was, but the social worker was taken totally by surprise. Christian pushes the social worker back, grabs his daughter, jumps into the SUV while pulling her arm, and she hits her head on the door frame going in. So this was not smooth. Mm-hmm. The social worker, I think this was actually kind of foolish, reaches out and grabs the door handle. Now, I get it. You don't want to lose a kid as a social worker, but this is now a job for the police. He grabs on to the door handle and he hangs onto it as the SUV accelerates.
this dude's an action hero. Like this is like
Dragged along.
this is supposed to be the beginning of an action movie, right? This is
The
like
social worker.
right? The social worker. This is like Vin Diesel or
Jason Statham.
Jason Statham. Jason Statham would be great in this
Yeah.
role. Like Jason Statham is the social worker, and he's there with the visitation. The dad tries to kidnap, and he just jumps on the hood of the car and goes for a ride through Boston streets. Just
I'm
like
going to supervise your visit.
right, like this social worker, like he took his job seriously. Like he was really like, I'm not letting this kid go, and he holds on, holds on, and gets dragged for a while.
Dragged and slightly injured, and in the process, he eventually does let go of the door handle, and I guess he rolls a few times. I don't know what happened, but yeah. So that, of course, this becomes a serious crime, not only because taking the daughter, but the
And
injury.
then he went on a one-man mission to find that child. Jason Statham is the social worker.
Coming out next week.
I'm not supervising you anymore. Please, just supervise me.
So the story of
Hollywood will have this movie made in like a year, so and we'll get no credit for it at all.
the story of the driver is interesting. That Gerhardsreiter conned him and manipulated him enough to believe that I think he said, I have a family friend that's following me. I want to lose this guy. I want to get rid of him. And the driver seemed to kind of have it in his mind. He did have it in his mind. This is somebody that's in the Rockefeller family, so they've got money, they've got this high esteem. So all right, I'm going to listen to what they say. I'm going to listen to what he says. He's paying me to do these things. I think he paid him $3,000 to do this, and of course, then he ends up being an accomplice in this. He's the getaway vehicle essentially for this kidnapping, and he didn't realize it. So again, we see Gerhardsreiter just manipulation techniques just through the roof.
Yeah. So the driver was able to escape responsibility. The police realized that he was being directed, and as you say, Christian said, "Look, expect this friend to be clingy," and that's kind of what he's doing. He was trying to grab the daughter. So I think this driver probably had experience with wealthy people who make unusual requests, and maybe would be pursued by clingy friends. Like, it probably made sense to him.
I mean, wealthy people can make some really weird requests. Like, build me a rocket so I can fire myself into space. that joke was topical because it just recently happened. But
Twice.
yeah, but Gerhardsreiter was like he was charged with custodial kidnapping, assault and battery, assault with a deadly weapon, referring to the SUV, that warrant went out that night.
Yeah, I found this to be an unusual, for somebody like Gerhardsreiter, who had not, well, maybe he had been violent before, but we don't know about that yet, Jonathan Sohas thing. Why didn't he just make an arrangement where, like, he was going to walk through a door and the door just locks behind him? Like, why the push-off and the jump-in move on a public street?
Because it's exciting. It's the kind of thing you would see in a movie. All right, this guy's been living his life as an actor since he came to the United States. He's always wanted to have that exciting movie life. So why not do the exciting movie kidnap thing? Like the rescue. Can't be a kidnapping. For him,
rescue, yeah.
For him, since he's the protagonist of the story, it's the rescue. He's rescuing his daughter from her evil mother. So he's gonna do everything he can to do that, to be in that role, and that's why it's more exciting that way. Because it'd be easy to have a locking door that just separates you out and you walk away, and you'd be like, oh, and if you get caught, you'd be like, oh, I didn't know the social worker just left. Like, I didn't know that door locked behind me.
Yeah,
that could be your defense, but no, that's not as exciting.
Well, especially considering this was something I think he was orchestrating when he made that offer. Because, again, who asked for 24 hours a year of supervised visitation? That makes no sense. So he only needed 1 hour a year. He only needed 1 minute.
Yeah.
So we see that, so Christian has the SUV driver pull over. He said he wants to take his daughter to the hospital. He calls a cab. He goes to the Boston Sailing Center, where a friend then drives him to Grand Central Terminal in her Lexus for $500. He doesn't have a driver's license. He had friends drive him around all over the place. And as soon as he gets out, someone called the friend and said, did you hear about Rockefeller? So and then she realized that she unwittingly aided.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So a warrant is issued for his arrest. He's arrested in Baltimore, Maryland. Now this part amazes me. So he switches names again.
Again.
Right.
Charles Chip Smith.
It's Smith. Now that was a little unoriginal. Smith, yeah.
It is one of the most common names in America.
Yeah,
along with Brown and Jones.
That's right. Yeah, but he also deviated from the C's. So now his monogram shirts and stuff were not going to work anymore because everything had CCC in it when he was in Manhattan. So he buys a $432,000 apartment, and he's got some type of boat that he has there too.
It's a catamaran that he has in a
Marina.
In a marina.
Yeah, and the FBI, an undercover agent walks up to him, and I can't remember what question they asked him, but it's not like, where are you going? And he said he was going to get a sandwich, and then like 20 agents jump out and grab him.
I think one of the marina employees, the FBI got him to call him and say,
the boat was taking on water.
Boat's sinking.
Yeah, and they wanted him to turn his head to the name Clark. So the undercover guy's like, where are you going, Clark? Or something. He's like, and he turned around and he says, I'm getting a sandwich. And that's when like they got him. So they would eventually figure out that he was Gerhartsreiter.
Right. One of the ways that they found out about that was one of my favorite shows, Unsolved Mysteries, was airing a lot of stuff about the John Sohas murder and talking about Christopher Chichester and who Robert Stack pronounced as Chichester. Mm-hmm. But later, when they did a remake and they had Dennis Farina doing the banner, he would pronounce it as Chichester.
Oh, yeah.
So that speaks to that. But the Edward Savio, who was one of the members of the family that Gerhardsreiter stayed with when he first got to the U.S., saw his picture on that show and went, I know who that is. And that's when he called it into the FBI, and they started putting things together and started connecting all of the dots. They had the big bulletin board with all the yarn and the string and the things, because so many identities to this guy. He just would change them the way we change shirts.
Robert Stack made so many great contributions to society. Not only Airplane, but all his time on Unsolved Mysteries. And of course, he was in the movies prior to that, though. Yeah. Very well known from that. But yeah, so television solves another crime. So the trial is in Boston, Massachusetts. It takes place in May and June of 2009. And here we see that this whole insanity defense is brought up. Rarely successful defense. But Christian said that his daughter communicated with him telepathically, said that he needed to be rescued from Sandra Boss, which is what he was trying to effect. Mental health professionals said that he had narcissistic personality disorder and delusional disorder with a grandiose type. And the prosecution, mental health experts, so that was the defense, prosecution said that he had mixed personality disorder, a mixture of antisocial and narcissistic. So we see a rare agreement on the narcissism. No one is denying. Mm-hmm. It's pretty obvious. Yeah.
Nobody denies that he's got narcissistic personality disorder. Nobody's denying that.
Now the one,
but it's whether he's delusional or not.
The one on the defense would say that he was on the far end. So if there's a continuum of narcissistic personality disorder, he's on the far end of it. But I didn't see a clip where she defined what the far end was. So I think she was
far end.
Yeah, I think she was indicating that he was delusional, and that was this continuum that she came up with.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about the far end. I've never seen any research or literature that indicates that there's this huge spectrum of narcissism. On this on the near end of the narcissistic spectrum is people just a little bit narcissistic, and it gets in their way. But on the far end, it's so delusional that they're.
All you have to do is draw a line with arrows on the end. And there you've got a continuum.
Well, that's a number line.
And that might have been all it took.
So NPD. So this disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, has an interesting history. It is not a very well regarded disorder in terms of like factor analyses, like the way it holds up. Does it measure a unitary construct? It actually is a disorder that seems put together fairly quickly and doesn't actually capture narcissism exceptionally well. So the disorder has features of grandiose narcissism primarily. If you look at like the different symptoms for it, you have grandiosity and envy and fantasies of wealth and power and being manipulative, lacking empathy. A lot of these are grandiose, like high status, being special. Narcissism, of course, has grandiose and vulnerable. Vulnerable, insecure, resentful. Vulnerable, actually, I think, much more dangerous in some ways. So they kind of painted Christian as the safer type of kind of bombastic, gregarious narcissist, which I think they were being a little too generous in a way, but then again, they did throw on the antisocial personality disorder, so that kind of rounded things out there, which is much more like vulnerable narcissism, much more similar to vulnerable narcissism, just like borderline personality disorder is. So we see here, once again, we kind of run into how personality theory, I think, is a lot easier to apply than diagnostic labels. Diagnostic labels are actually very poor for many things. They're decent at like connecting a treatment protocol. Like that's actually all they really do.
They've let us bill insurance companies.
They're good for billing.
They're good for billing, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's this talk for a long time now with the DSM moving over to a dimensional model. They kind of experiment with it a little bit in the back of the current DSM, which is DSM-5. And the complaint here, and I find this kind of an interesting dichotomy, is that, okay, the categorical, like just saying, oh, you have NPD or you have antisocial, a lot of clinicians can understand that, and it's pretty straightforward. Like, okay, I'm reading the symptoms, and you have 5 of 9, so you must have it. Even though it's actually a little harder than that, but that's how they think of clinicians.
A lot harder than that.
Yeah, because each one just requires some type of discernment, right? Mm-hmm. But the dimensional model, which I've used before, is much more nuanced. It's a lot more flexibility. It's like, a more nuanced programming language like C++ as compared to like Visual Basic or something. You can do a lot more with it, a lot of more detailed control. But it does take a lot of training to use it. It takes a lot of time. And then there's this concern that clients won't be able to get anything out of a dimensional diagnosis, one that actually goes through essentially the 5-factor model. Mm-hmm. So I think this case is a great example. I mean, it seems pretty clear that he's narcissistic. I agree, it does appear probably a little more grandiose than vulnerable, although we see some evidence of both there. But yet he's just, boom, NPD. And the case is kind of closed with okay, what does that mean? Does that mean he's not responsible for the crime? It just, the story stops. Oh, it's NPD. Doesn't mean anything, right? So we don't really know much about him with that diagnosis.
I think one of the difficulties with switching over to a dimensional model is that learning curve on it. I mean, we have psychiatrists, they have medical doctorates. Diagnostic codes are great for them. Like they love that. The dimensions would be okay for them. Psychologists, again, PhDs, learning that wouldn't be really all that difficult. Counselors, of course, master's degree. Clinical social workers who have a focus in doing clinical work, be able to get it. But then there's the other social workers who aren't clinical, who get like 2 classes in how to do therapy, who are then also supposed to diagnose people. Those are the people, and there's a lot of them. Those are the people for whom a dimensional model will be very, very difficult because they're used to just being able to go, but like, okay, this book says,
yeah,
you've got 6 of 7, so you've got this. Let's find you resources to help with that. And the dimensional model is not going to help them.
I actually think you look at the DSM, I like the DSM. I think it's written with a degree of precision. I think it's as good as it can be based on science. But the truth is that most clinicians, PhD or otherwise, don't know how to diagnose. Not really. And, you see people like, just like you're describing, they'll go into the book and they'll be like, oh, okay, I'm this, you must have this. They don't read the differential. And let me just explore what else it could be. Oh, you know what? This explains it better. If you follow the DSM, I think it does leave you to a conclusion most of the time. You can get a useful diagnostic label that can help with treatment. But I find that very few clinicians actually know how to use the DSM. And the concern is if you switch to the dimensional model, their heads are just going to explode. Right? Like, oh yeah, I'm never going to figure this out because I don't even use it properly now. So it's this whole debate over, do we push for more training? But then you can get into any area of counseling and say we need more training. Mm-hmm. Suicide, prevention, different, depressive disorders, like any area can vie for attention and say, no, we need more training. How do you make the argument that it should be diagnosing, which some clinicians don't even like doing when they do understand how to do it? They're against it.
Unfortunately, there's just, none of us do, but we don't like taking time to do things when we think we've got it good enough. So looking at the differential diagnoses, well, if I think it's this, why, in my mind, why would I go ahead and look into something else?
Or if the client tells you, like, I talked about this before in videos, people come in and ask these days, especially for PTSD.
Yeah.
It's become a disorder. It's like fashionable, which it confuses me. It's a horrible disorder. Or, depression. That's, I know I'm depressed. I just need that depression
paper.
code.
Yeah.
Right. I often hear depression and anxiety. Okay, well, tell me where those are coming from. I don't like doing diagnostics. I love to follow Carl Rogers' model. Like diagnostic codes are, to me, they're just for the insurance company. I put a diagnostic code down so that the insurance company goes, okay, we'll keep paying for this. That's why I use a diagnostic code. But in sessions with clients, we talk about things in more personal terms, in externalized terms. I generally have clients with, we talk about histrionic personality disorder. We give it a name. And we don't say histrionic personality disorder. It's like, it's Kathleen. Like,
Right.
like that's Kathleen, and Kathleen's doing these things to you. And, how do you feel about that? And, that's how we uncover certain things. I do the same thing with trauma. I've done the same thing with anorexia. And we take that problem issue and we talk about it as if it's something else. We give it a different name. And we're not talking about diagnostic codes. And that has helped a lot of people to be able to figure out what's going on. Diagnostic code, to me, it's like I said, it's just for the insurance company. If somebody says I've got depression, I'm like, okay, put depression down. What are we going to name depression? And I think that's meeting the client where they are.
Yeah, well, it speaks to how helpful is the diagnosis for treatment, or can you maneuver treatment with the symptoms alone, and with an understanding of the person's story alone, and do you need a diagnosis? A lot of really good clinicians refuse to use the DSM, right? Or they refuse to use it properly, right? It's like, oh, adjustment disorder, but I haven't even said anything. Yeah, it doesn't really,
It's a good code to use.
Yeah.
Which of course runs into an ethical problem. But but if a counselor is like private pay, they don't have to diagnose.
Right.
They can just say, I'm not diagnosing you, but I'm still charging you.
$150 an hour. I'll see you.
I've had
If you want a diagnosis, I'll give you one, but I don't have to.
I've had clients who were coming in looking for that diagnosis, like you were talking about. And then one in particular I'm thinking of was private pay. And so, we didn't really talk about it. And later that client would realize, I'm glad you didn't give me that diagnosis, because then I would have taken that, it would have inflated my ego, and I would have just done so much more harm to myself, because now I'm convinced that this one thing's wrong with me, and now I'm wearing it like a badge of honor. On the other side of that, though, there's some people who want certainty with that.
Right.
And I've had clients not come back to me because I didn't talk about that. And they said, well, this person, they're coming in, they're going to give me a diagnosis, and I'm going to have a name to it. I'm going to this and that. And so, of course, I'm thinking, wow, we're doing the same work, or at least similar work, whether you give a name to it or not, And so I'm thankful that people do things different ways, because that's not how I'm going to operate in a situation like that. So I'm glad there's other people that do, because maybe that's what a client's looking for.
There are clients who are looking for a diagnosis because I don't know what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what's wrong. And in those instances, giving a diagnosis could be therapeutic.
Right. It can be comforting because you're used to it in the medical world or in the car mechanic world.
Yeah.
Like, oh, your starter's not working. Well, at least I know it's not my battery. Or at least I know it's not a short somewhere. It's the starter. Like, I understand it. So, yeah, it can bring comfort. It reminds me, there was a movie about, I think it was Searching for Bobby Fischer. It was about a chess grandmaster.
Yeah.
Ben Kingsley, I think, was in it. Really, really good. Really good
That's
actor.
a good movie.
Yeah, and I think there was a point where
It wasn't actually about Bobby Fischer. It was about another kid.
Searching for Bobby Fischer. Right? It wasn't
Searching
him.
for Bobby Fischer wasn't about Bobby Fischer. It was
Yeah, it was about a kid who was a prodigy. Spoiler alert for Searching for Bobby Fischer.
a great movie.
Really, it really was, and a lot of chess movies are not. So I was really happy with it. But there was this scene where, kind of toward the end, where the kid, I forget the kid's name in the movie, but he wanted to be a grandmaster, and I think it was Ben Kingsley who got frustrated and kind of wrote out the I guess it's just a piece of paper. And sometimes I think that way with like the diagnosis. It's like, okay, write it out. Here you go. Now let's talk about what's important.
Right.
You know, I mean, clearly the kid was a grandmaster at that point. It seems like. I mean, I don't know the technical definition, but it seemed like he was pretty good at that point in the movie, like really good. But I think Ben Kingsley, he felt like the learning lesson could happen better if you focus on the chess and not the piece of paper. Like not, okay, I can say I'm a grandmaster. Yeah. So another good chess movie was the series, rather. It was on Netflix recently with the...
Queen's Gambit?
Yes.
Queen's Gambit.
Yeah, that was pretty good. Had drug use, and spoiler alert for Queen's Gambit, but it was very good. That was actually a book before, written by a guy who died right after he wrote it.
And we don't know if there was much drug use by Christian Gerhartsreiter.
Yeah, they never reported
I don't
anything.
think there really is. Yeah. But it comes back to the definitely seem to have narcissistic tendencies, if not, and some antisocial tendencies as well. Definitely demonstrated at times grandiosity. And it's debatable about whether it was delusional or whether that was exaggerated.
Yeah, I don't see, I mean, based on what's available, there's nothing that clearly links to delusional, but of course the clinicians that talked to him might have had other information, but he really did seem to accept responsibility almost in a way. Like he said, he was just kidding with the identities. Somebody's delusional, they're not going to say they're just kidding. It's not going to be something like a prank. Oh, I was playing a prank.
The delusion is fully believed.
Yeah.
Like it's fully internalized, and it's like, no, that is real. All of that stuff was brought up at the trial for the kidnapping, the custodial kidnapping and assault and battery and assault with a deadly weapon. All of those charges were up, and all of that stuff came up. And Gerhardsreiter did not take a witness stand.
No.
At all, which probably the one thing that he did right.
Yeah.
Even though he did end up being convicted of the kidnapping, as well as one count of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon.
Yeah, so as serious as the actions were, you know, we're so used to talking about murder, we're often the sentence is something like 25 to life or life. He ended up with 4 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. Now, he had some other years for the assault, but it was concurrent. So it ended up being 45 total. But less than 2 years later, the state of California decided it was time to charge him with murder.
Yeah, because that was June 2009 when he was convicted, and it would be 2010 when the bones were finally identified using DNA.
Right. So now the truck comes in, right? The Nissan truck.
They know these bones belong to Jonathan Sohas. They know where the truck was. They can tie it to this person, and now they start tying everything back together to him. Yeah.
So that trial occurs in California in 2013, and we see the pickup truck was I think a major issue. We talked about the plastic bags from the 2 universities where he attended. There was a chainsaw he borrowed from one of his neighbors, and people said he never touched tools. He didn't know what tools were.
He had no idea what they were, but can I borrow a chainsaw? You sure you know how to use this? Yeah, I'll be fine. I'm not chopping up the body or anything.
Do you remember the guy, Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers?
Hey.
Yeah.
There was a special on him where, there's this rumor. It's not true. There's a rumor he was a sniper.
Right.
And one of those specials, they were interviewing a guy who knew him, and he's like, he couldn't even use a screwdriver, much less a rifle.
Yeah, that was the big urban legend thing, was that Fred Rogers was the most... Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he was the deadliest sniper in all of Vietnam. He killed hundreds of people. Through no, he didn't. No.
I love Mr. Rogers.
Fred Rogers was just a wonderful, genuine human being who loved the idea of people learning. And one of my favorite stories is about his goldfish.
Yeah.
On the show, when he would feed the fish, initially he would just feed them. But after a little blind girl had a letter written in saying she wanted to make sure the fish were okay, he started announcing that he was feeding his fish.
Right.
Like, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to feed the fish now. And he would feed the fish because he wanted this one little girl to know that the fish were okay.
And he would respond, handwrite every letter, reply back to his fans, or potentially have somebody else do it at times if it was too much. But that guy was amazing.
He absolutely was.
Yeah, he really committed to a Carl Rogers way of being, right? Even though it's, of course, different people, but similar philosophy. In a way, I think Fred Rogers was a better version of Carl Rogers.
It was a more public version.
Yeah. Well, man, somebody lived the life. I think Carl Rogers didn't always live the life, but Fred Rogers did.
Yeah.
Although I think Carl Rogers came around toward the end and believed in his own philosophy when I think he doubted it for a while. So we see here the chainsaw, and then another neighbor noticed the backyard was torn up, like someone had been digging. So that didn't look good.
And he said he'd had some, I think it was plumbing work done.
Yeah.
Like when they asked him about it, he's like, I had a plumbing work done.
There was also traces of blood found in the guest house where Christian lived. But, if you look at the other side of this, the not guilty, there was no witnesses, no video, no DNA, and there was I think, a pretty good alternate theory of the crime, which is that Linda Sohas killed Jonathan and left. She was never found. Never heard from her again. People who murder people sometimes disappear.
And that was his defense at the trial.
Yeah, it was a good defense.
One of my favorite things, probably, that I have ever read was Gerhardsreiter explaining his theory about Linda Sohas still being alive. So he said, I don't know, this was after he was arrested, of course, but he said he had put a trace on a horse trader in 1987. Now, I don't know what this put a trace on means, but...
That's CIA lingo.
And yet another entity that he could have been. So put a trace on a horse trainer in 1987 in North Carolina or Virginia. He didn't remember. So he said that this horse trainer's name was Belinda Schuss. Okay? And the way he explained it, so this is a very visual thing that I'm going to try to explain here. So Schuss spelled S-C-H-U-S. Okay? Now their last name, Sohas, was S-O-H-U-S. And the way he explained it was, if you cut off part of the O in Sohas, it becomes a C. So there you get Schuss, okay? And then the first name, Belinda, you add 2 letters, right? And you take away 2 letters, and now it's Linda, right? So his theory was that, and if anybody's going to know about it, it's going to be Gerhardsreiter. His theory was that that was the perfect way to disguise your name, but also not many people would get it, except for this mastermind Gerhardsreiter that knows everything about changing identities. And the way that you come to that conclusion of, wait a minute, I see the O, cut off some of it. Oh no, this must be her. The way he came to that conclusion is amazing to me. Like, this guy keeps getting better and better.
Like, in his mind, apparently, he was thinking about Linda. She's Linda Sohas, but she wants to be Linda Schuss.
There you
Belinda
go.
Schuss. That's how she got the name. She wanted to be Linda Schuss. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
The person interviewing him was like, that's what you have to go off of. You're like, that's all I got right now, but I'm going to get more.
It's like, I'm going to find more.
Yeah, every time Christian talked, I think he hurt himself. But if you just look at the evidence of the murder charge, I think there was reasonable doubt. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of convicting somebody when there's no physical evidence, no witnesses, and it's just you had the truck and another person is gone. You might have murdered them too, but we're not charging you with that.
Well, the interesting thing, the postcards we mentioned earlier became a big thing that was tried to be used by both the defense and the prosecution. The defense was like, well, Linda Sohas sent postcards that proves she was alive.
And his DNA wasn't on the cards.
His DNA wasn't on the cards. We know that's a thing. Interestingly, the prosecution was able to bring in a witness named Elaine Siskoff, who'd known Gerhardsreiter when he was at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, 1980s. And they dated for a few months. And he told her these huge stories about when he left Wisconsin, that he was going to England, and he was going to pursue an internship with George Lucas in England as they're filming the next Star Wars movie. which wasn't going to happen.
What year was this?
Right, in 1985.
Now, when was Return of the Jedi? When did that come out? Was that 86? Was that 83?
I don't remember the year. Give me a second.
I'll look it up, Mike. You can keep going.
Anyway, Elaine Siskoff said that she received postcards from him that were mailed from England. And police know that when she received those postcards, because they have the post date on them, she still had them. He was in San Marino, California. He was already living with Dee Dee. See, he somehow managed to get someone in England to purchase these postcards
I mail them.
and mail them for him. So the prosecutor's like, if he could do that in 1985 from England, why couldn't he get somebody to send them from France? So it became reasonable that the postcards sent by Linda Sohas, quote unquote, could have been from Gerhardsreiter, having arranged to have them sent to cover up for Linda. And if he covered up for Linda, where is she? How he must be involved in. Even if she's not dead, he was involved.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they certainly built a case that I think puts it close, but it's still, this was murder. And I still think he did it. And obviously he was found guilty of the murder. But I think there was reasonable doubt. And I think it's really not a question of law enforcement did a bad job. I think it's Christian did an effective job. You know, he did a good job disposing of the body in a way where no DNA was on there, no fingerprints, nothing, although they still found the body. He shouldn't have put it in the backyard, of course, but yeah, and also a lot of time had gone by.
If I had to guess, I would say that Linda was easier to move.
Or was alive and went with him and they killed her later.
Or, yeah, potentially was alive and went later, but he was in the house with Dee Dee for a couple of weeks after Linda and John disappeared, were reported missing, or supposedly missing. He'd have to have gone a lot to keep her somewhere alive, but unable to escape, to be seen anywhere.
Or even unwilling to escape.
Or unwilling to escape.
Maybe he made her believe that Jonathan had just died, and maybe he was taking care of her at that was
right.
the ruse.
They could have been a criminal conspiracy, and then she started to get a little flaky, and he killed her as well.
It's possible. Either way, either she was alive or she was easier to move. I think that John Sohas was bigger and harder for him to move, and that's what I think that Linda was dead at the time was because if she had been in on it, it had two people who could have moved John's body. Mm-hmm. The fact that he cut him up into 3 pieces, dismembered him, indicates that it was too much of a job for him to move. So,
which was interesting considering he was right in the backyard where the 2 houses were, like the main house and the guest house. So he didn't move the body that much.
Right.
I mean, why? It just seems strange to cut up a body when you're not moving it somewhere, like over a distance.
It doesn't seem well thought out, but it's one of I need to cut up this body so I can move it. Where am I going to move it to? Oh crap! Well, I'll just throw in the ground right here because I have to get rid of it soon.
Yeah, one would think that Gerhardsreiter was physically capable of dragging Jonathan's body into the backyard. I would think. You know, that's a very short distance. But yeah, maybe he had a longer, like a more distant location in mind, and then just got tired.
And it got tired or felt that people were getting close. Mm-hmm. And so he had to get rid of it quick. So, and who knows, maybe there was plumbing work being done and they had dug up something and said, there's a hole right there. Whoop.
Yeah.
But the fact that the book bags were found with the remains, one of the jurors said was the most solid piece of evidence.
Yeah, that did him in.
That was presented. That with the postcards and the all of the other circumstantial stuff, because it's a very circumstantial case. All of that, the jurors said that they believed that he had killed John Sohas.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I certainly think he did too. I'm a little skeptical that if it meets reasonable doubt. We've seen other cases where there was circumstantial evidence. Michael Morton's a good example, where if you just look at that case, you don't know anything about it, and like, oh yeah, husband, hey, I had an argument. Oh boy, that doesn't look good.
Yeah, it doesn't look good at all.
Note.
Right, the note. Like you could easily get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure he did it. And it turns out he had nothing to do with it. Now, I think Gerhartsreiter did it because of his other behavior.
Yeah.
But it's not clear how much, I don't know how much of that came into the proceeding, like the whole multiple names. That wouldn't look good. I think that would convince the jury too.
I don't know.
Like if you can make up all these names and kidnap your own daughter.
Yeah, Gerhardsreiter did make he made mistakes throughout his life, but one of the big things was he fired his attorneys during the sentencing phase. And he made one statement during that phase. He said, "I want to assert my innocence and that I firmly believe that the victim's wife killed the victim. But be that as it may, once again, I did not commit the crime of which I stand accused."
Yeah, which I think is necessary. Like if he admits it, then it hurts your appeal, right? If you're trying to, yeah.
It's interesting. He was given the maximum sentence of 27 years to life, with credit for 1 year served after finishing his sentence in Massachusetts. And then on appeal in 2015, his sentence was reduced to 26 years to life.
Yeah, he must have had a party back in his prison cell.
They're doing him a solid there.
Woo, give me a solid. Like 27 years reduced to 26 for the 1 year of good behavior, but then his official sentence is reduced to 26 years to life. So I guess with 1 year of good behavior, it's down to 25 years.
Well, he's
To
eligible.
life.
He's eligible. Yeah, well, and to life often means life, right? So like people say 25 to life. That in reality, especially when accounting for people's ages, like dying in prison, that usually does mean life. That's a bad, 25-year sentence is a lot better than 25 to life. A lot better. He's eligible for parole. I don't think he's going to get it, but he's eligible in December of 2029. He'll be 68 years old. Some sources say 2030 at 69. It's academic, I don't think.
And given his statements, immediately after the trial during the sentencing hearing, and he's not wavered from that statement in the years since, a parole board's not going to give it because they want to see contrition and responsibility. You're taking responsibility for the crime which you're convicted of, and you're showing contrition and change. You can't show rehabilitation if you're still maintaining your innocence. He's not going to get the parole.
No, he's pulling a Betty Broderick. Well, actually, in a way, he's not, because Betty Broderick said she did it, and she's not sorry she did it.
Right.
But either way, there's a not sorry component.
Yeah, he's saying, I didn't do it. I didn't do it all. And, I guess if Linda Sohas is ever discovered alive somewhere, if Belinda Schuss really is Linda Sohas, and it's discovered that she managed to craft a great identity to hide this entire time, that maybe he'll be exonerated and come out. I find it more likely that her remains would be discovered and then tied back to him, and he'd be tried for that as well.
I wonder if he gets to see his daughter in prison.
I would be very surprised.
I don't think he does.
Because that would be, I guess, kind of ironic, because the whole incident with the kidnapping and all that, and I'm curious how that works.
Yeah, how do you reconnect with somebody like that? Like good times, like remember that time that I hit your head? Whoops! And that social worker we were dragging on the ground, he didn't seem like he was having too much fun.
Remember that time? Yeah, that was it. I rescued you from your mother.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting. Like this story been in pop culture for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was the Clark Rockefeller anger, the Rockefeller connection really like made this connect to so much that the Lifetime Network did a movie called Who is Clark Rockefeller in 2010. And that movie actually had Sherry Stringfield and Eric McCormick in it. Like, actually two pretty good big TV names. Christian Crowe produced it. No, he didn't. Wouldn't that be funny? But what's really funny is if they had waited 1 year to make this movie, they could have included the whole murder of Jonathan Sohas. But they didn't, because that movie is completely about the kidnapping. Like his kind of his earlier life leading up to marrying Sandra Boss and the relationship with Sandra Boss, and then the end of it. But it gets so much crazier than that.
Yeah,
it's so much crazier.
It's tough, I think, when you're a filmmaker, when there's a story like this. I think it must be tough to determine when you go ahead and make it. right? Because something else can come up. Like imagine if somebody made a movie about Kristen Smart, and then the arrest of Paul Flores happened.
We made this movie in 2019 on Kristen Smart. 2020, we caught the guy. Like, we don't have a conviction, but we have an arrest in that case. But that was early 2021. So like anything could happen. Like when do you say it's enough?
Yeah, I remember
When you say it's time.
I remember I made a video a while back. I never released it, but it was on a woman named Melissa Caddick. Another case in Australia. A lot of cases I've done in Australia.
We have a lot of Australian viewers too.
I do.
So,
yeah. Australia is a great place, and there's a lot of interesting true crime that comes out of Australia. The dingo ate my baby case was, a Chamberlain, a very famous case, and many others, in Australia. Two different crimes with people going over a balcony, one with a garbage chute. I mean, just all kinds of unusual samurai sword murder, amazing case. But either way, there was this. What was I talking about? Oh, Melissa Caddick, right? Melissa Caddick was this like financier, scam artist who had cheated, kind of like a Bernie Madoff, but without necessarily the Ponzi scheme part. And she had a lot of international connections, and she disappeared. And there was security cameras around her house. Like it was a nice neighborhood, and there was no one saw where she went. And everybody assumed that she must have traveled internationally and be like hiding under a different name. So I made the video, and I kind of looked at it. I'm like, well, it does seem like she flew to Europe like 30 times in the 5 years before, something like that. I'm like, she probably did just take off with the money because it was like millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. So I made the video. I didn't release it because other videos were in the queue, and I'm getting ready to release it one day, and I'm like, let me just check and see if there's any updates on the story. They found her foot in a shoe on the beach, like washed up on the beach. I'm like, well, that does seem like she is not alive anymore. Because usually,
people usually take their feet with them when they go on a trip like that.
Yeah, usually pack it. That's something on the list, like pack that. So it turns out that I guess the cameras just didn't pick her up, but she apparently had walked to the beach, which was a cliff right near her house, and jumped off. Yeah,
when you say, as soon as you said foot in shoe, the immediate thing was suicide. There's this very, very common thing that happens with suicides around bridges and cliffs. And people jump in, they go down, they die, and they sink down to the bottom, and their feet are protected by from things in their shoes. Mm-hmm. And it's not until enough decomposition happens, and then the rubber of the shoes picks them up, and they get washed away to the side of the river or the beach or anything like that. And it's actually really, really common in a lot of places where there are tall bridges, and people complete suicides off of them.
Yes, you figure all the speculation that video contained about where she might be, like all the things I did, like I usually do in my videos, it was all irrelevant once the foot was found. So timing is really,
it's very important.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you always take a chance with that. And you obviously would have never known, and you want to create a video, but you always take a chance with that.
It's a danger of a current case, too. It was a case, I think it was on 60 Minutes Australia, which is a great channel, YouTube channel. Also, of course, it's a TV channel in Australia. But a lot of great, not lately too much in true crime, but they used to do a lot of true crime. Maybe there's just not as much crime to do now, but so that is the risk you take when you're looking at something topical like that and current. You're right. They missed a huge part of the Gerhartsreiter, like the whole murder part.
Missed the whole murder part of it by a year that they just waited to see. But I guess at that point he'd already been convicted and was in jail. And like, there's nothing else to tell about this story. Let's tell the story.
Little update. You put like the card at the end. Like,
just got to do.
By the way,
got to do the sequel, right?
There you go.
It's like, who is Clark Rockefeller? Who is Christian Gerhartsreiter? The sequel to Who is Clark Rockefeller? And they get a really perfect point too, because it goes on the cover. It gives you Rockefeller, but with the Roman numerals in place of the L's. Right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Clark Rockefeller 2. Roman numerals instead of L's. Like that'd be perfect. I can make the poster. See, this is why I should have been a TV producer.
That's right.
I have all these great ideas. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, so I became a counselor.
You're stuck helping people as a mental health counselor.
I'm stuck making people's lives better instead of just bearable.
That sounds terrible, man.
Yeah. So sorry to hear about that.
It sounds so unfulfilling.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the last thing I want to talk about in this case, so that's it for Gerhartsreiter. I think that you look at this case and you look at the one I talked about, I think another video, Anna Sorokin, the young lady in New York who scammed all those people, making them believe she was wealthy, like an heiress or something. Gerhardsreiter was much, much better at it. But I think this really exposes the superficial, shallow nature of the so-called elites. People who think that they have the best in life. They buy the nicest stuff. They're wealthy. They go to the right places for vacation and all this. And this Thurston Howell, the third imitator, sneaks in and totally tricks pretty much all of them profoundly. What does that say about that grandiose kind of narcissistic mentality of the so-called, the self-described elites of society? I mean, what's it mean when a fraud can earn their way into your inner circle more convincingly than anybody?
I think that there's a lot of people in those circles who tend to be feeling alone. You see a lot of people in more middle class and lower class, so to speak. We kind of have to form connections with each other to make things. So family becomes really important. Having real connections with family becomes really important. Making sure that we have supports and feel supported becomes really important. At a certain point in certain social circles amongst the wealthy, it's more about the image. And if you can convincingly put that image out there, you're in. But they don't look further deeper than that image because everyone's got their kind of like force fields up there. And part of that is defensive. I think it's, at a certain point, everyone's got their hand out and you've got millions of dollars. People are like, can you give me some money? And you go, nope, putting my force field up. So you try and stay away from people so they're not asking you for money. And that becomes isolating. You self-isolate in many cases. There are some who are just like, no, I'm fine. and they are fine. And those are the ones who aren't as infatuated with the image. And I think those were the ones who could see through Clark Rockefeller.
Yeah, it seems like that community just needs more skepticism and maybe even about themselves, like about, what lack of substance they're really projecting. Again, if they adopt a fraud as one of their own, what does that say about the quality of the life you're living?
I wonder if it's that lack of skepticism that perhaps got them to that level in some cases, that maybe they were just willing to take chances and, of course, they'd make an educated choice about something, but at some point you just have to take a chance and obviously have lots of money, so maybe they can take a chance and not worry so much about the consequences of it. So maybe because they're not as skeptical about what might happen or what, something like that. Whereas somebody who's not in the elite category, I might not have as much money, so therefore I have to be much more careful with it and much more skeptical about what could possibly happen. So therefore, potentially allowing more people in my inner circle without vetting them as much, just because, I assume if they've made it to this level, that they're at the same level I am, they do the same things I do, and so therefore somebody can con their way into it, maybe a little bit more easily than other circles. Maybe, I don't know. Never been at that level.
And unfortunately, you were not an aristocrat.
You could have been an aristocrat, yeah. But it's the familiarity, I think, like there's a tendency for people to trust others that they believe are like them. Like police officers tend to trust police officers, even imposters we've seen a few times. But it's just, you're a police officer, you must be trustworthy. So I think it's probably at some level an extension of your own identity. Like if somebody's like you and you distrust them, what does that say about you? Maybe it's that effect. But yeah, Gerhardsreiter is another interesting case that he exposed, I think, the real narcissism of some of that elite class. It's a phony, it's a constructed position. I have money or I believe I have status, so I'm important. There's no scientific principle that tells us that. People aren't important or not important. They're equal. And, I think when people try to violate that, try to say, well, I'm better, somebody like Gerhartsreiter comes along to demonstrate that they're really not, in the most embarrassing way possible for them. The Thurston Howell the third thing did it for me. Like, that's, like, I don't know, that, if they can't see
Lovey. Lovey.
That was good, Mike.
I think it was, I can't remember her name, but the woman who played Mary Ann, who died recently after years of alcohol problems. I think she actually reached out to her fan base for money, and they sent her money because she had run out of the Gilligan's Island money. We should look at Gilligan's Island as a topic for a video sometime.
All the stereotypes that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and then, they go flooding the parking lot to make that pond, and just all the things with that whole show, the production, it was hysterical.
That was an amazing show.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was.
Some of the stuff that Bob Denver did just was amazing in general.
Yeah, Bob Denver was not without talent. Yeah, but he got cast type, and that was the end of it. So, yeah, he's also, I think they're all dead, right? Are any of them alive?
I don't know.
We'll have to look that up and save it for that episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know the professor died not that long ago too, but I don't know about the rest of them. And I know there's like 100 different gingers, so who knows? Like different, like that was the one position that turned out, not really, it's like 3 or something, but yeah. All right. Well, that's Gerhartsreiter. Certainly an interesting character. Any final thoughts about Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter?
We've indicated or elaborate, we've talked about this, but the question of why did he lie? And we've talked about this, the whole time, but just to, I guess, summarize it, my perspective is that he was trying to get probably many different things, but status, money, fame, maybe, with all the different things he did, and trying to get into some kind of a group or collectiveness with other people, and with a certain echelon of people too. We've talked about that. Just wanting to be with the elites and have a name for himself. He came from a small town in Germany and didn't want to live that small town life. So he really wanted something different is my impression. What are you guys' impression about why he did all this lying?
I think he had a lot of ambition, wanted to get out of the small town life. And I think that I think at a certain point, lying for everybody becomes something that works in certain areas. And I think for him, it really started to become much more of a tool when he decided to leave his home and go to the U.S. And then it just became what he had to rely on to get by. Like he had to find ways to live. He had to find a place to stay. And then it became much more like he couldn't focus on anybody else because he was on himself. And his ambitions were generally, I need to get to Hollywood and become an actor. So putting on these different roles and these different faces and these different things was his way of trying to do that. And I think he ended up getting derailed with the Jonathan Sohas event. Mm-hmm. Like I think that right there hit him with the paranoia. I don't think he was as paranoid before that. But like running from the police, so we've talked about other mm-hmm. things, like when you've committed a murder and you're running from the police, like that can stand over top of you. And I think that really is what hit his paranoia the most. And it derailed his entire plan of going to Hollywood because he couldn't become a big star at that point. He had to find other ways to satisfy his ambition through that.
Yeah, the murder doesn't fit in. If you look at Gerhartsreiter and his narcissism and kind of like the wanting to be in that elite class, and again, like the fake paintings and the clothes and all the things he did, the murder doesn't make sense. The murder was totally unnecessary. He didn't get anything except an old truck. I mean, Nissans, they make good truck, but not worth killing somebody, right?
If it's a matter of like, I can see a situation in which he clearly was manipulating Dee Dee. And if John caught him in the act of manipulating her into trying to get into her will or trying to get something out of her and confronted him, it became a defensive maneuver. And the death kind of happened accidentally. Like Dee Dee passes out, and Gerhartsreiter goes to the guest house, but John follows him, and he ends up getting into an altercation. It's an accidental, self-defense kind of thing. And then Linda comes in, sees it, freaks out, and it's just, he kills her too. And then now he's got bodies he's got to hide. Because, one thing is self-defense I might be able to get away with. Two, in the same night, that's like, I'm going to jail for that. So now he's got to find a way to get rid of them. And then that just derails the entire thing. And it's a plausible thing. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that I can see a scenario in which that's what happened, because it does seem out of character. Like he's great at lying. Mm-hmm. He's great at manipulating other people, pretending to be other people. But his ambitions were always to that point. When John and Linda disappeared, it was always, I'm going to Hollywood, I'm going to be an actor. And he's auditing film things. And even right after that, with the Christopher Crowe, he chose that name because it was a famous film producer. Something I could have been.
Yeah. It's an interesting theory about the murder. I don't know. I've always thought about it as more premeditated, like he wanted something from them. But again, it still doesn't make sense that way. Like there's no way the murder for me makes sense, especially for someone with grandiose narcissism. Murder's not their go-to. It would just be move out of town and start over again. And then when he gets to New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut and all that, he's still he's attracting attention. Even though he says he's paranoid, and he probably was, he was doing things that attracted attention, like standing up in that town hall meeting, whatever, and saying, I'll pay $110,000 for this.
But he's Clark Rockefeller at that point. He's not.
He feels safe.
He's not Christopher Chichester, and it's been so many years since then. And that's why I think it had to have been like a moment of passion, a momentary thing. It wasn't premeditated. I don't think that it should have been a first degree situation, because if that's what happened, but we don't have any indication of what happened, because he still maintains his innocence, and we still don't know what happened to Linda.
Right, we don't know if she's dead, although I think she's presumed dead, but there's no way to know.
Well, she's Belinda Schuss.
You never know. I mean, this is a strange case, but yeah, that's the murder part is unusual, and actually even the kidnapping.
It is
part,
an unusual podcast, yes.
Yeah, it's an unusual podcast.
It's the murder part.
But the kidnapping doesn't really make sense to me either. It seems out of character. The violent component seems out of character for a grandiose narcissist. Now, they did throw in that antisocial piece, but that doesn't always really, I don't know, I never really connected with the antisocial piece either for him. But, I mean, he, in his imposter role, and this gets lost, I think, in the timeline because we're talking about key events, there were years where he just went about his business and didn't attract any attention. He wasn't stabbing people, shooting people, whatever he did, or blunt force trauma, however he killed Jonathan. It just, years go by, he's doing something, and all of a sudden, he becomes violent. I don't know. But, I guess you could say that for any murder.
Yeah. You could say that for any murder. Again, the moment of self-defense or crime of passion kind of thing, there are many people who can go their entire life, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and then all of a sudden an incident happens, they're forced, their hand is forced.
Right.
It's not a premeditated thing. And I think for those some people with a grandiose narcissism could plan out a murder. I think it's more likely that it's going to be from someone who's not as grandiose, but has that kind of internal struggle, the low self-esteem, but the big exterior thing. Those are the people who are going to be more likely to react with violence, because I've got to defend myself. If not my reputation, I've got to defend my reputation. Right. If nothing else, I can't let that person get away with saying those things.
Yeah, Gerhartsreiter struck me as a thinker. Like somebody, again, he had that philosophical background that was so convincing that even people good at philosophy were like, yeah, this guy knows his stuff. Even Sandra Boss, clearly intelligent, well-rounded, good education, thought that he was the smartest man she ever met.
Right.
So, or smartest person she ever met. And he had a lot of resources to call upon, new identities. Like he could do a lot of things other than murder. So, yeah, I don't know. Just it's definitely a mysterious case. Maybe like some people theorize with the kidnapping that maybe he became attached to the daughter, like he really wanted her, not to fulfill something narcissistic, but or maybe to maybe like this is an extension of me, and I have to keep her and teach her or whatever. But it doesn't explain the murder part. So
it's also just as likely that it was the kidnapping was aimed at hurting Sandra.
Right, to get back
Back at her. Just like give me that dress that you really like that I got for you, because that's going to push your button. Taking the daughter was going to be the same. It was the same it could have been the same motivation behind that. So Christian Gerhartsreiter, definitely an interesting person, interesting life.
Yeah. He got a lot accomplished before he went to prison for 26 to life. Right?
Yeah, not 27, 26.
Take away that year. Yeah.
With 1 year already served of that before starting.
So that's where we'll wrap up this case. Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter, just type of case you don't see every day. That's for sure. So we look forward to your comments. Please put them in the comments section. Any thoughts about this case or requests for other videos, other ideas? We have a bunch of ideas that we're talking about for the future, different murder parts, and I think some alien lizard humanoid episodes coming up as well. Maybe some movie part.
Yeah, the movie part.
The movie part stuff, Back to the Future. And there was another one we talked about just during this. Was it Clue? Or
Clue? Yeah. There's Clue.
Gladiator.
Gladiator. We could do Gladiator. Yeah, talk about the movie part.
Yeah, so any movie ideas, any murder cases, conspiracy theories, unusual cases, again, please put those in the comment section.
And I know that people want to see tangents.
Right, tangents, right?
We got to start working on tangents.
We almost had an episode of that going on.
We did have a couple of tangents at the time.
They were pretty good. Yeah. So, yeah, again, please put those comments in there. We certainly appreciate it, and we'll read them. Hope you enjoyed this episode of The Murder Part, and we will talk to you soon.